I've got a case study, but before I do that, questions? Yeah.
Earlier you mentioned reimbursement codes. What specifically is that? Is it like a company policy or insurance policy or a federal policy? What does that actually comprise of?
So I am not an expert on reimbursement codes, but in general, Medicare has codes that they pay for every procedure that happens. It gets coded, and they have an amount, an allowable amount for that particular procedure. And with the Affordable Care Act, things are changing from a per procedure code to a care for an episode. So it's a broader, so the hospital would get care for a cardiac event as opposed to placement of a stent. Okay. Did I answer that right? Because folks that know more about this than I am. And so it's those specific codes, and you need to have, they're called DRG codes for hospital-based, and there's something else for out-of-hospital. I can't remember what it is, out-of-hospital. And they're very specific. And if you're reading them and you're not an expert on it, you can see a couple different codes and they look exactly the same to you. I happen to have a friend who went to school in that, and I always refer to her when I need some help on understanding what the codes are. Yeah.
So you just got to get like approved through the insurance company.
Yeah, it's
make sure it falls in line with the code.
That's correct. Right, and the example might, if you have a procedure that's got a procedure code and it allows a maximum of $10,000, well then you can do an analysis and you can look at how much it actually costs a typical hospital to do that. So if it only costs them $8,000, well then they're making a little bit of money on that procedure. And if you brought an innovation there, they might be willing to do it if it's a better outcome or if it saves them money down the road. But if they've got $10,000 for reimbursement and it's already costing them $12,000, then they're very unlikely to take on anything new within that procedure set.
Okay.
Yep. Other questions right now? Okay.
Tony, I just want to add on this reimbursement thing is that at the end of the day, it comes down to what people are looking for to prove a specific thing. I mean, I like to think of three totally different areas that are not necessarily related. There's intellectual property, there's regulatory approval, and then there's reimbursement. And the criteria for those things are just completely unrelated, right? So intellectual property, is it new, is it novel, is it non-obvious? But you have to get over those benchmarks to have some intellectual property, okay? Regulatory approval, is it safe, is it effective, right? Does it do what it's supposed to do for the patient? But when you get into reimbursement, it has to do with, are you saving the system money? And what the hurdle to prove that is, those different things are different for each stage. So just as an example, if you have a product which is touted to reduce pain, and your regulatory approval is about not damaging a certain nerve during a procedure, and you can show that you don't damage this nerve during this procedure, then you might get your regulatory approval. But then when the CMS comes in and says, okay, in order to get a reimbursement code, we need to do a patient study that this many patients over 10 years, so they can all say that they experienced less pain and ultimately used less pain treatment, less drugs over the course of that time, so the overall cost of care was reduced. And then suddenly to do that study to get that code is prohibitively expensive. So it's not just like, hey, we need to go get a code, and it's less about, is it a DRG code or a CMS code or what the number is and navigating those codes. It's understanding the medical economics of, it might cost us more money to run a study to ever get to market than we can possibly raise just to get the code. I don't know if that makes any sense, but they're just different barriers to market entry, with reimbursement being one of them.